Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Windsor Park Climate Conversation, brought to you by the Windsor Park Climate Committee and the Windsor Park Neighborhood Association. My name is Martin Lukey, and I'm chair of the Climate Committee. And tonight we have a really great subject for you: climate mitigation, ideas and technologies. Something we haven't really covered before. And so we put together a really great panel to discuss this idea. But first, let's meet my co-host, Barrett Sundberg. Hello, Barrett. Welcome to the show. Good to see you, all the way from Colombia, as I understand.
Yes, hello, everyone. After many years as a Windsor Park resident, I am currently in South America, thus proving that we are, in fact, all neighbors. So this neighborhood show can tackle such big topics. Hopefully, we can make some progress with this excellent panel.
Also in the background, we've got our director, Selwyn Pollitt, who might pop in once in a while and ask a question himself. And another of our committee members is Jose, who might be coming in from the Canary Islands. You never can tell where we're going to be greeting you from. So let's get to the introductions. We have first Dr. Joshua Rhodes, who's a research scientist at the University of Texas, a non-resident fellow at Columbia University, and a regular contributor to Forbes magazine. His current work is in the area of smart grid and the bulk electricity system, and is also interested in public policy and its impacts on the efficiency of the micro and macro economy. Welcome, Doctor.
Thanks for having me.
Jenny Morgan is the Market Development Manager at Tradewater Group, which helps organizations achieve climate impact through the purchase of carbon credits, reducing fugitive gas emissions, and providing climate change awareness and action. Welcome, Jenny.
Yeah.
Dr. Deb Niyogi is director of the TexUs lab at UT's Jackson School of Geosciences. Dr. Niyogi's research seeks to significantly contribute to our understanding of the Earth system, particularly the urban and agricultural landscapes. Welcome, Dr. Niyogi.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And go ahead, Barrett.
Trevor Brooks is currently pursuing a PhD at UT's Texas US lab, studying urban extremes and how they have become altered by climate change and urbanization. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, let's get right to it. The question of the minute is, what is climate mitigation? What does that actually mean? Anybody want to tackle that? Want to jump on it first? Dr. Rhodes, I'll go to you.
So climate mitigation. So there's a couple, to be kind of precise in kind of some of the language and things that we use. So climate mitigation is really kind of, stopping those greenhouse gases from getting into the atmosphere. The things that, the gases that mostly CO2, but also methane and other types of greenhouse gases that are, acting as that blanket that are essentially warming up the planet. And so climate mitigation is stopping that from happening. There's also climate adaptation, which is getting used to how the climate will change, the climate change that's already kind of baked in, or what might be expected to come if we don't do very well with mitigation. And then there's also mitigating the impacts of climate change. So there's a couple different ways of using those words. So just essentially they can mean like, stopping climate change from happening, but then also kind of what do we do with the climate change we're already going to have, and what we might expect in the future.
Dr. Niyogi, that sounds like your area.
Yes. So the word climate mitigation, essentially, when you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there are 3 working groups that have been formed when you tackle about the whole climate issue. First is just the science of climate change, how climate is changing, what are the factors. Second is essentially adaptation. Given the fact that climate is changing, what can communities do? This could be things like, putting trees, or it could be like building dams so that the water doesn't spill over if there's a sea level rise. And the third one is really mitigating the problem, and which presupposes that this is coming from greenhouse emissions. So anything which can reduce the greenhouse emissions either at source or once it is emitted, what can you do to take it out? So we call it source or a sink. That process is the climate mitigation part.
And Ginny, that seems to be what your company is doing is taking it from the source.
Yeah, so they fall into two buckets, one being avoidance and one being removal. So just loosely speaking, a nature-based solution would be a removal, or direct air capture is a removal. It's a technology used to remove carbon from the atmosphere. We're tackling the before it happens part of climate change. So, and the gases that we're destroying and preventing from leaking cannot be sequestered once leaked. So once they leak, they do their damage quite quickly. And so we're really focusing on turning the faucet off of the flooding bathroom and then letting other folks help put the towels down.
Trevor, I think she's talking about that bathtub that is the reference for basically understanding all of the gases that are involved in climate change. And you are studying Austin, as a matter of fact, and so what do you think about mitigation in Austin specifically? How does that fit in?
Yeah, I think Austin is a really unique city, mainly because we're a very young, pretty young city that's growing really quickly, and so there's a lot of really good opportunities here as to kind of grow the right way the first time instead of what a lot of cities are doing now, where they're trying to build back better. We really have an opportunity to build right the first time. And I think we have a lot of motivated people in the city and a lot of bright minds. And so we have really good opportunities here to really do something right.
So can you tell us, can you follow that up and explain a little more about what are some of the major sources or magnifiers of emissions or impacts in Austin, and then an example of one of the things being discussed to mitigate?
Yeah, so Austin, obviously, one of the major things is the construction that's happening. It's happening all over Austin. They say there's a joke going around that the crane is our new city bird because all the cranes out there that's building, and so how we build is a really big contributor because sometimes the building codes are not situated primarily with environmental stuff, with environmental climate mitigation in mind, but however, that is something that is being discussed, and there are things that are happening in city council, and there are things that are happening from a more executive, like the executive agency level, that are really kind of being discussed about. And that includes things from changing building codes to having pilot programs for climate mitigation and climate adaptation infrastructure. A lot of these things are happening right now, just maybe a little bit more behind the scenes because it is so kind of early in the process.
Right. Excellent. Dr. Rhodes, what kind of research are you doing with climate mitigation, or are you around it? Are you really looking at it?
Yeah, so my area of research is roughly focused on the energy system, which is a big part of the problem. A lot of the greenhouse gases that go into the atmosphere are coming from the electricity sector, the oil and gas sectors, through the burning of that oil and gas in the transportation sectors. And so, yeah, the research that I'm doing is looking at, how do we electrify basically as much of the services and end uses of energy that we want, because at the end of the day, nobody wants a gallon of gasoline, or they don't want the kilowatt hour of electricity. They want the thing that gives them, right? They want to get from point A to point B. They want the proverbial, cold beers and hot showers. And essentially, like, if you're using a fossil fuel for that end use, it's going to be very hard to, rein in that the greenhouse gases associated with that, because the problem is very diffuse. You've got millions of tailpipes out there. You've got millions of homes that are, maybe heating their water with things like natural gas. But if you electrify those end uses, where that energy is being consumed turning the wheels, heating the water, doing the stuff. There's no greenhouse gases associated there, but there is at where we're making the electricity. But the idea is that we're talking about hundreds of places we're making electricity, not millions of places that we're burning fossil fuels kind of at the edge there. And so my research really kind of focuses on is how do we not only grow the amount of electricity that we want to consume, but how do we use more of that electricity for end uses? Because if we use electricity for more end uses, say for transportation or building heating, that's not only going to change how much electricity we use, but it's going to change when we use that electricity. And if we're going to move to more things like wind and solar, sun doesn't always blow, but wind doesn't always blow, sun doesn't always shine. We got to make sure that we're able to, match that production and consumption of electricity, because with electricity, you have to match supply and demand in real time. All the electricity that's burning all these computers and lets you hear me right now is being generated right now at some power plant, and we need to make sure we can do that cleanly. And that's what I focus on.
Brilliant. Dr. Niyogi, what are you focusing on there at the TexUs labs?
Well, I mean, there are several things. One is we work with the city. We have this first UT City Climate Collab, which is like the first of its kind anywhere in the world, where you are actually working with the city for unique climate solutions. I often say, like politics, climate is very local. We have global climate models. We have a really good understanding about what's happening at a global scale. But when we are trying to develop solutions like you're doing with the Windsor Park, you need to come down in your backyard. And there you need to do things which are very localized. And so one of the things that we need to work on is bringing these effects that are way down at a local scale. And that requires a technique called downscaling, where you have the large scale information and you bring it to the finer scale. So that is one thing we do to try to understand the forcings and the effects. Forcings meaning how much temperature is going to change. Say in Windsor Park versus say in Great Hills, how much is going to change for the same climate change we're talking about? What is it going to be dependent on? It is likely going to be dependent on things like the green cover you have, the construction you have, and so forth. So you bring it down at a local scale using those understanding. That's one. The second thing is what Trevor was referring, that if you look at the whole problem, you have, I think Jenny mentioned, a source and a consumption. The source is what I think Joshua was talking about, that you could change the source from a vehicular emissions, a vehicular consumption, whatever you're using, to something else, renewable energy. Or you could have a consumption approach where instead of using something for a old generator, you might have retrofitted with a new generator, which might require lesser amount of energy. So you have this controls available to you. Either you change the source or you change the consumption. And that is where you have to work with the city and the community and everyone to see what is the best mechanism available, whether it is a policy tool, whether it is a financial incentive, whether it is the availability of technology, or whether it is just good science. And that is where we have been working a lot in terms of listening to communities, understanding what they can do, and of course with the industry and the technology that is available that can be used by the city. So that's part of our major exciting initiative right now.
Well, that's really good to hear. And you heard it first here, ladies and gentlemen, on the Windsor Park Climate Conversation. No one else is talking about it. So Jenny, tell us about Tradewater Group. What do you do? How does that work?
So we started destroying refrigerants, which is a coolant that you can find in anything that needs to be temperature managed. We started destroying refrigerants that were obtained in the United States. These type of refrigerants have been banned from production, but they're not banned to be used, and there isn't a mandate to destroy them. So we all agreed that they were bad and we shouldn't make any more of them, but then that was where it ended. There wasn't a follow through of making sure.
To make sure I'm tuned in here, these are the ones that made the hole in the ozone layer. Is this
Yes,
what we're
correct.
talking about? Okay.
Yes. So they're ozone depleting substances.
One other thing, they are what, 10,000 times what a CO2 molecule is?
Yes. So a CFC is, which is an older version, is 10,200 times more potent than carbon. And then there's more recent ones that are 2,000 times more potent than carbon. So they warm the planet very fast. And so thinking of it by, complementing the local initiatives, but then also looking at a global atmospheric strategy of addressing climate change. We are, a refrigerant is a refrigerant. So whether it leaks in one region or another, it's going to affect the warming of the planet. So we're really tackling that global side of the work. We started going international. We are also started destroying halons, which is a fire suppressant. Those are about 7,000 times more potent than carbon. And then just last year, we started plugging orphaned oil and gas wells. So these are wells that have no owner. There's no one that's going to plug them. And so by utilizing the carbon market, we're able to then find funding to then plug these wells.
Oh, wow. That's a lot more direct than some of the carbon credit schemes that are out there.
I'll be honest, I'm a big fan of the carbon market. I do think that there are some folks that have kind of ruined the reputation, at least in the media, but from a cynical stance a little bit, but I won't go too negative. But I think when there's systems in place that allow for harm to continue, the system likes it when we're all arguing with each other about who's the bad boy and who's doing the right thing. And so I've seen an enormous amount of impact that's been, billions and billions of tons have been either removed or prevented through the carbon market. So I think there are flaws, but I think that the opportunities are too large to ignore.
Fascinating. It brings to mind this idea of other technologies existing out there that are ideas right now that research is going into. Direct air capture is the thing that is off the top of my head that's actually being built right now. What do y'all think about things like that and the money that's going to take to build them, scale to scale, and how thermodynamics and entropy are involved in these kinds of technologies?
Can I also ask if anyone is actually familiar, right? There's something like $1 billion plant being built in Texas. Isn't that? I'm very curious to see what that actually means and if that's going to actually do anything useful, or is it just a financial boondoggle?
Anybody want to tackle that question? Thank you, Selwyn.
Yeah, so direct air capture is interesting. We've been using CO2 for a lot of things for decades. One of the earliest industrial uses of CO2 has actually been enhanced oil recovery. And so you inject CO2 into a depleted oil well to push the oil and gas towards the wells where they can pull it out of the ground. So one could argue that maybe that's not, the best climate use of sequestering CO2, but it did help us learn the technology of moving CO2 around, storing it, pressurizing it, putting it into geologic formations, and learning kind of how it interacts with all the pore space and everything that's going on underneath. There are some companies like Occidental Petroleum that are, building like these direct air capture, systems, and there are there are companies like, Facebook or Meta, I guess, and, others that are, buying into, these removal, or Microsoft, I think maybe is the actual one, or buying into these, like, buying into these credits. And just like any, nascent technology, it's going to be expensive. Wind and solar used to be way more expensive than they are now, and there's a bunch of learning that went with them, and has driven the prices and things down. And if you look at like things like solar, they're less energy dense than things like gas and oil, so we don't always have to move in that direction. Sometimes we are moving in the other direction for for other reasons. In this case, it got super cheap, and also we we want them. We're injecting our values into the choices of energy, which then cycle into CO2 and things like that impact. I look at direct air capture from a grid asset as well. If you can have one of the things is going to high levels of wind and solar, it's not like a traditional power plant really where you're able to control the production of electricity. But if you are able to use something like direct air capture to soak up extra produce wind and solar that we don't need for other purposes and things like that, you can use that to kind of balance the grid as well. So instead of just using supply, you can also use demand to balance those systems. And I think you can make each of them more economic. And we've got a whole bunch of money from the Inflation Reduction Act and things like that kind of rolling into it as well to try to subsidize and get the nascent technology up and running.
We've covered the Inflation Reduction Act a couple of times, and in fact had our Congressman Lloyd Doggett on the show to help us understand it. Dr. Niyogi, are you using any of that IRA money? Is that something that the university can tap into for your research?
Yes, of course. I think, but I'll build up on what Josh was saying, that in fact, at the University of Texas Jackson School of Geosciences, there is a Gulf Coast Carbon Capture Center, and that has been pretty active in terms of some of the issues related to carbon capture, as the name goes, and that is using a number of technology, whether it is you're using some technology to put it back into the geological reserves, or you're doing some of the capture, so forth. The big issue here, and I think Josh said that very right, is that there is a technology cost, but there is also an opportunity cost, in the sense that we need a number of approaches to look at this problem, and we can't square ourselves into one. And so what the academia does right now is exploring all possible ways, and even if the cost may be high, over a period of time, there is an understanding that we will come down to something which will be better. Jenny made an interesting comment about the carbon market that at some level might come into picture, but there is a huge issue here right now with regards to, say, some of the solutions about the verification of assets. So the problems that come up is you have a source here, and you don't have to mitigate the problem right at the source, because greenhouse gases are so well mixed. So something coming from Austin, even if I do something about it in Houston, I'm still solving the same problem. And in that context, when people say we have solved something A or B or C, whether it is from nature-based solution or some other approaches, how do you actually account for it is another big area that is coming up. So in the context of accounting, I think that's another area where academia is playing a pretty big role in trying to come up with means of developing the whole understanding of the cycle and so forth. So of course, academia is thriving with ideas that are waiting to be seeded, whether through IRA or any other resources. We will always be willing to work with partners.
Trevor, I see you nodding your head a lot over there. Would you like to share what it is you're agreeing with over there? Is some of your research starting to percolate up in this conversation?
Yes. So I really couldn't have said it any better myself, as Dr. Niyogi said. But I want to express the really cool movement that's kind of happening within academia and policy, where it used to be that science would do all this really cool scientific work in its own kind of isolated box, and they would always just talk to each other. And then they left the cities to implement all of their research on their own, and that kind of led to a real disparity in the application and the efficacy of the actual research. And so really where things are going with especially the UT City Climate Collab that Dr. Niyogi is talking about is kind of this merger between the academia and the city policy, right? And so and this is important for a couple reasons. One is, implementing this really expensive infrastructure that you're going to have. It's important to kind of have all the facts before you just kind of go willy-nilly implementing it. And so having the city sponsor research like this is really, really beneficial from our standpoint and their standpoint. And so it's kind of a synergistic relationship. And so that's kind of why you've seen me nodding my head, because that's kind of right where I'm in the middle of studying is climate adaptation infrastructure with the city. And so I'm pretty excited about that.
Barrett, you got any thoughts there?
Well, I'm just fascinated by the different ways and how these things can be measured and how they can be measured reliably. It makes me think back to I know there's activists around and probably some in our audience who are quite suspicious of carbon credits because of projects that follow the format, well, there's a forest somewhere, or there's a stand of trees somewhere, and somebody says, I was going to cut them down, but if you pay me carbon credits, I won't cut them down. And the question is, were they really going to get cut down, and how do you make sure they weren't sold twice? And does that really, how does that really have an effect? That's why it sounds like what the Tradewater is doing by, say, capping off these abandoned wells is a very concrete mitigation, because you can tell it's clearly preventing some emissions that were probably going to happen. But how do you measure it? And how does it compare to an amount? How do you arrive at a price?
Jenny, do you have an answer for that?
Sure. So nature-based solutions have a big hill to climb. If you're looking at credits, you need to make sure that they're permanent. Very difficult for nature-based solutions to promise that your investment will be permanent, because acts of God can disrupt it. Even if all well intentions are put into the project, sometimes that it can't be guaranteed. Additionality, which is what you were referring to, that the climate benefit is an additional action. So not just, oh, a tree, here's a credit. It has to be literally you stood in front of it before it was about to get logged, and then it wasn't truly, and then now you've prevented deforestation, for example. So my husband's in forestry. I totally sympathize with the challenges that they have of proving what they're doing. Credit rating agencies have been really interesting of coming out. They can assist with that measurement of additionality and permanence and help buyers feel a bit more comfortable in what they're investing in. So that's nature. Going with what our work is, we don't have those challenges because our work is permanent. Once the gas is broken down, it's no longer in existence. And once the well is capped, it no longer is leaking. Also, these actions are additional. So there's no end-of-life solution for refrigerants or halons. And then there's no additionality there's no mandate to plug orphaned wells. There is federal funding that has been allocated to plugging some of them, but it barely scratches the surface. So we're going at the wells that states have specifically identified that they will never plug just due to lack of funding. And so if we're talking about wells or just any of our projects, we basically measure the amount of gas that would be leaked if it was, and then that's then quantified by the global warming potential of that gas. And then there's various protocols on the registries that define how you would exactly measure it. And there's clear formulas of making those measurements. I can dive into a specific project if you're more interested in that, but that way you have a firm number and you see the math of how everything is then calculated.
I'm curious if the state of Texas has got a lot of leaky wells right now out in the Permian Basin.
Yes, we've poked more holes in this state than probably all the other states combined.
Yeah, there's 3 million abandoned and orphaned wells in the US alone, and those are just documented. So 1 million of them are orphaned. So that means that no one will ever pay to have them plugged unless the state and or Tradewater covers that, or other project developers that are doing similar work.
1 million wells. So
and they're leaking almost 4,000 tons of methane a year on average. So it's just like plummeting
Per
on
well?
average.
Per well?
per well on average. Yeah. Some of
Wow.
them aren't that bad. And some of them are. Some of them are very bad, where they've started to crack along the side. So that not only are they leaking up, but they're also leaking out.
How much does it cost to cap off a well?
So our credits are priced at one specific price all around the world. That way it's just clear. And again, our projects are very global. Our well projects are a bit more local, just because methane can wreak havoc in other areas of your community, whereas refrigerants are fairly safe to interact with, but they're not good for the planet. Whereas methane, it's not safe to interact with them. It can lead to, higher rates of respiratory illness and in your water and land, and the economic value of the land. I mean, I could go on. So the methane projects are definitely touching that kind of local, but all of our credits are priced at $18 a ton right now.
So
And that's
Pretty
just
good.
calculated by what it costs to do the work.
So talking about these wells kind of brings me back to the question of the carbon sequestration, right out of the atmosphere. And I think there was a mention maybe by Joshua about taking the carbon and shoving it down into a well. I wonder if it'd be useful to maybe explain a little better to folks what the options are. I mean, I've heard some options like you have big fans and big boxes and some kind of process, and then carbon dioxide comes squirting out of a pipe somewhere, and you can turn it into concrete, and you can turn it into bowls that you can eat out of, and you can turn it into chainmail. And I'm being silly, obviously, but I'm curious if anyone can talk a little about those things.
Carbon night. I like that for the chainmail example you
Yes.
got going there. I should
Okay.
figure that one out.
Carbon
I feel
nights.
like you should be stepping out of a Ferrari onto the horse. But anyway, yeah.
I do have some diagrams that Martin shared with me. Here's a diagram of a big
Yeah.
box with dots moving around.
Anybody want to explain what we're looking at there? It is a direct air capture design. And from the science, basically you have to
Yeah.
heat up this field so that the CO2 can be captured in it. And there's water that's, I think, moved through the field, and then it collects on the bottom and then goes down the pipe, as you can see. But you have to have it at 100 degrees. Is that correct? Does anybody know the science here?
Well, essentially, I mean, the basis of carbon capture is, you've got to separate the carbon gas from all the other, gases that are around it. And in just regular air, the air you and I are breathing, it's a very low concentration of CO2 actually. So it can take quite a bit of energy and surface area, which I think this is, trying to show. But essentially, I mean, you're moving a bunch of air through some kind of medium that is able to, kind of where that the CO2 is sticking to it. And then, later on, once that medium has become, you can think of it like a sponge, it's like, it's a CO2 sponge basically. And then at some point, whenever the sponge is full, you can heat that up, or you run another chemical through it, and the CO2 will come kind of off of that sponge, and you're kind of recharge it, and you're able to then separate that and move it to other for other applications. You can also do that with things like at power plants. So like if you take the flue gas, or like the gas coming out of a power plant, it's going to have more CO2. You're going to be in the tens of percents versus like the low percentages of CO2. So you can kind of have, kind of more bang for your buck there. But you also have other nasty things in the air that you kind of in that flue gas and stuff that you gotta deal with. And then you have to do something with it, right? You've either got to so you have some push it underground into, like this is showing, depleted oil and gas reservoirs. So places that we've taken, molecules out, and you can push molecules back into the pore space that kind of exists. If you've got the right geology and subsurface geology. You can also have chemical reactions with that CO2, and you can turn it into, bicarbonates and things like that. You can actually, turn it into solids, which is, which I think you're mentioning, can be done kind of on the surface. You can make bowls and I guess chainmail if you really, wanted to. But and there's quite a bit of, money out there in terms of like the 45Q credits in terms of up to $85 a ton of CO2 if you're able to reuse, either sequester it or reuse it in some kind of, durable good. But essentially is like
And so 45Q, is that, I'm guessing it's a section of the Inflation Reduction Act, maybe, or?
Well, it was edited by the Inflation Reduction Act. 45Q has been around for a little bit longer than that, and I'm not going to pretend to know exactly where it is in the millions of pages of laws. But the Inflation Reduction Act did increase the value. So it used to be you got like $55 per ton of CO2 for sequestering it, but now you get $85 for ton of CO2 for sequestering it. Yeah.
Where does that money come from?
Taxes, man. It's tax credits for these companies. So it's like, companies pay taxes, and these are tax credits, so they don't have to pay as much taxes for that. The thing that the Inflation Reduction Act also did was it made those tax credits transferable, so you can sell those tax credits. So if you don't have the tax equity to eat up with tax credits, you can sell them to someone else who does, which makes that market more liquid and more likely to be more fully utilized.
There is a second mechanism I'll just add in at the international scale, and that deals with the Green Climate Fund, the GCF. And the GCF are essentially commitments that have been made by member nations to solve some of these larger problems, and they are clearly millions of dollars. And therein, each country will have to come up with a project or set of projects that they actually propose, and then working with communities, working with industry, and so forth. And these are coming from this global climate fund, or the Green Climate Fund as a global entity in that part. So it is clearly policy, which is with the credits and taxes, but also with regards to some international IMF-like funding that helps fuel some of these large-scale investments and large-scale developments.
Jenny, I'm curious if Tradewater is involved in any of that tax credit or anything that
not at this
helps at all.
Not at this time. You could utilize the credits to commit to your climate strategy, but it's not from a tax standpoint.
So
that'd be cool, though.
Right. Do we have any unintended consequences from mitigation where we're trying to do something and is it possible that it goes horribly wrong, or it's maybe a giant waste of money? I mean, is that, I guess, kind of what we were talking about before with accounting these things before we actually do them?
Yeah, I don't want to be, I wouldn't necessarily be too aggressive about framing that aggressively, but like any new technology that you're going to invest in, you're going to have unintended consequences that we don't necessarily know the outcomes. And that's one of the reasons why I was stressing so much earlier the importance between that relationship between city and academia, because we're able to measure out a lot of those unintended consequences, whether it be through modeling studies or lab-based studies or even small pilot-based field studies. And so that's something that, again, is kind of a synergistic relationship where city benefits and we benefit, because both sides get a really better understanding of much better understanding of what these things will actually do and how it will affect the people that live in the community.
Yeah, let me expand a bit more on a global scale about the unintended consequences. So there's a very well respected study by some colleagues in the UK Met Office that looked at the potential where you are putting carbon into the boreal forest, into the soil through some technology, which would go into the soil aspect. So by the process of that, what it could then do is change the what we call the albedo or the color of the soils because of the organic content. And as a result of that, what it would then do is heat up the boreal region much more than what it would have been with the carbon that's out there. That's not a problem. The problem then is that what it would do is change the natural ecosystem exchange, meaning how the carbon is being taken in, photosynthesis, and so forth. And then that could change the manner in which we actually have more emissions coming out. Now, of course, this is a theoretical computational model. They have done some experiments which are called the FACE experiments, for instance, that what happens if you have carbon enrichment in terms of forests and soils and so forth. And there are initial benefits, then the benefits start decreasing. There could be some other consequences that come up. Reality is, anytime we are going to perturb a system, we are going to have problems. Either we'll know about them right away or we'll know about them later on. The advantages of knowing a technology and then studying it for a while and then employing it is that the probability of an unintended consequence goes down because we understand the intended consequences of such a thing. Like even let's take an example of what happened after biofuel. When we had the E85 and the whole biofuel Security Act, there was a boom for a while where everyone wanted to move from growing corn for food to corn to fuel. So you might have heard about the news about, the unintended consequences of the price of tortilla going up in Mexico and so forth. That was not the intent of the Biofuel Act, but the whole thing was an estimate of that. But over a period of time, we have settled into how this can all be managed by putting the right positives and negatives in place. Clearly, some of the technology where we are going to disrupt the natural cycle, whether it is even putting paints on the roads or you are changing some of the emissions, there are going to be some feedbacks. But that will be interesting to see how well we understand it and how well we can come up with counter technology to mitigate those efforts. And I'm pretty optimistic about technology coming to our help.
Speaking of which, I have to ask the question, what about geoengineering? That's a technology idea where we're spraying things in the sky and blocking the sunlight. That's geoengineering. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we have some natural experiments associated around volcanic activity. We can we've seen what happens when these aerosols and other things are kind of, sprayed or get high into the atmosphere, and kind of what that, can do for cooling, and or changing kind of how much solar radiation hits the planet, which is, kind of what they're looking to do. Geoengineering can be kind of scary. It kind of seems like a big thing. Although we've seen some natural experiments of that with volcanic activity. It doesn't last forever. It's not like flipping a switch. And so I'm not as concerned about it as some aren't. But I think I'd rather try out some of these other technologies before we go and actually try to change the solar radiation balance of the entire planet first. But we might get there because honestly, it'd be kind of quick and cheap. And if our best efforts in the other ways don't work out, I could see it happening. And it's also the fact that it doesn't take like, a COP28 or, the UN to do it. It could be any given country that just has airplanes that can get high enough in the atmosphere could do it. It's not like it, is rocket science. We don't even need rockets, just need planes. So I don't know. We may see it happen.
I hope not, but I would love to hear other opinions on that.
Jenny, what do you think?
Oh,
I mean, you're trying
yeah,
to get stuff out of the atmosphere.
yeah. I mean, I think we have to do the work, and doing the work sometimes isn't as timely, and we have to really just educate ourselves on what we could be doing better and what projects could pay dividends on our climate benefits more than others. I do think that there are few initiatives that in the future could be really exciting. My main concern is that we are in a time frame that we need to be addressing things that can scale today, that the technology is available today, and that it's reasonable within the resources that we have to achieve them, and then see where we are. But for us to make our 2030 goals, I mean, direct air capture isn't going to do that. So we need to focus on deforestation, short-lived climate pollutants, and waste and food waste, and focus on those and really tunnel in on those initiatives that can, show us 50% of a decrease of emissions. I mean,
Can you explain more about what the food waste piece?
it's just one of the largest emitters, with when the food breaks down, it's releasing those gases. Agriculture itself has a lot of challenges that are putting a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And so if we tackled food waste, deforestation, definitely in like Brazil and Indonesia areas that are threatened, and then these short-lived climate pollutants, similar to what Tradewater is addressing, those three things in the next 7 years could really change the course of history. Then we can then invest on some more long-term initiatives. I get really concerned about carbon tunnel vision and very future-based climate initiatives for 2050, whereas like we're right under the wire right now.
Yeah, definitely. That's really intriguing. So if you bring it down to the neighborhood level, I mean, are you talking about, like when you say farming, are we talking about like till agriculture? Or are we talking about, is that the kind of problem? Or are we talking about just rotting products in the fields? And then are you talking, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely not my space, but I
Okay.
do think, food waste and throwing food out, being able to compost those materials, and then also livestock, that those two items are putting a lot of gas into the atmosphere.
Yeah, because like when you waste food, it's not only like when that food decays, like the methane and the stuff, that comes from that, but it's all the energy that went into, growing that food, the fertilizer that went into it, the diesel for the tractors, the cold chain that moved it, that kept it to the point where it could have been eaten, but then it wasn't. So it's like, and then it's the water that was washing, and all that other stuff that gets something to you on your plate that you can eat safely, has a long energy chain associated with that, and every single one of those steps, has has emissions associated with it if it's using energy. And so it's not just that piece of food, but it's the way that food was grown and got to you. So it's actually a lot bigger.
I like that energy chain.
Smiling there. You seem to maybe know something here within your lab of what this entails locally here in Austin. Are you all looking at food waste as part of your research?
There's certainly a food for thought right now.
Love it.
Well, so in this idea of mitigation, it seems like, with the many different options, that what we've said on this program many times is that we just want to try everything. We want to, kitchen sink it. We want to just really get as much stuff going as possible in as many arenas as possible. What Tradewater is doing, Jenny, is really impressive, and I'm really glad to hear that that's actually happening for real, because no one really understands that's low-hanging fruit as far as as we're concerned. We did do an episode on methane, and there was that arena of, boy, we need to stop what's coming out of the ground. And in Texas, we have a massive problem with that. But a future program, I think, is going to be on regenerative farming, where we change these agricultural processes altogether and reduce the amount of fertilizer, for example, that we're using. And that has downstream effects, pollution wise, et cetera. Florida has an enormous problem with agriculture fertilizer ruining their waters there and killing massive numbers of creatures. All these ideas all coalesce into let's do everything. And I'm assuming, Dr. Rhodes, that part of your research is involving policy on this, and how it is we take that to the only place where it's really going to have any effect, and that's Congress.
Yeah, no, I mean, so we model the impacts of policy, whether that would be, something like a carbon tax or something like a cap, or the pure economist in me would like to have those types of things because they're easier to understand. But the fact is, like, in this country, we don't use sticks. We don't use sticks. We use carrots. So we use like tax credits and technology standards and other types of things. So we, model the impact of how does the market respond to not saying you can't do this, but here's some money to do this. Like, how do we push those things forward? And so, I mean, we definitely see bumps from the IRA, not only from just the numbers, but also like the duration of it. Like, the investment tax credits and the production tax credits, the things that have really driven a lot of wind and solar. Historically, we've said we've extended those credits for 1 year here, 2 years here, 3 years, another year there, and doing that in single-digit years makes it hard to invest in a long-term in a long-term economy for that. But this one is a 10-year process, so it helps some of that mid-cycle volatility. It helps mitigate some of that mid-cycle uncertainty. And so I think that'll really help, that'll really help push. I mean, if you look at, like, when I zoom out to the 40,000 foot view, I mean, if you look at like the two biggest sources of emissions in this country, it's electricity and it's transportation. And we have the technologies to mitigate that. In fact, if we electrified just even light duty transportation and then made all of that electricity clean, that's 65% of our CO2 emissions right there, like, done. And we have the technology to do all of those things. And it doesn't mean we have to go all wind and solar. There's other technologies and things like that. France is 70% nuclear, and they have some of the cleanest energy in the world. And so it's like, we have technology. We have the technology to do this. We just need, we either need the policy or, we need the policy.
That's the whole thing. When we had Congressman Doggett on, he did talk about the carrot and the stick, and there were a couple of sticks in there that he did mention.
There are a couple, yeah.
There's a couple, right? But
yeah.
I think that all of these things that we talk about ultimately have to be involved in some kind of carrot opportunity for America.
Yeah, but I think, like, we can make some of those decisions, like, even at our local level, that kind of push that from the ground up. We can, ask our utility, or, buy if Austin Energy, which is the utility that serves most of Austin, Texas, like, you can buy green choice power, right? And they have to go out and they have to get it. So they have to go buy, they have to go fund more, wind and solar projects and things like that. You can electrify your transportation, and it's not just you, because, like, the more EVs that are bought, the faster they move on to the secondary market, where most people can't afford the $50,000 car. But once they get down into the secondary market, where they've been used for a while, they can trickle down. We've got critical mineral issues associated with that, but I think we're starting to figure all that out as well. We know where we can get it. It just becomes a price point, but with the billions of dollars that are there, I'm pretty optimistic on those.
Joshua, I have to ask you a quick question because you just said EV. And by the way, we talked about Congressman Doggett a couple of times, and I want to acknowledge that one of the architect behind the climate collab with the city has been Congressman Doggett in providing us with the congressional appropriation funds for that. But the question I have is this. I go to a parking lot right now and I see those slots where they have these EV spots and I see they're getting free electricity. When will that stop and why do I not get free fuel when I park in the parking lot?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I mean, so I've had an EV in Austin since 2016, and so at the beginning, whenever they were rolling, those out, a lot of them were free. One, because they didn't have the connectivity to charge anyone, so they just didn't have the ability to take credit card payments, and the systems weren't working. So it was just easier, and actually cost less money to just do it for free because electricity was pretty cheap.
I love that.
Yeah, and so and there are certain areas like certain businesses and things like that that are doing that because they're wanting people to sit in their coffee shop and charge, and so there are certain benefits like that. But if you go around to most of them now, like the ChargePoint network that's in Austin or the EVgo network or other things, you do have to pay for them. Now you can pay $25 every 6 months and get as much as you want, but you also got to sit there long enough to get that credit. And the DC fast chargers are not free anymore, to my chagrin. But
No, I
yeah.
get you. I think the point I'm trying to say is that over a period of time, as we move towards a new infrastructure grid,
Mm.
where you're going to have EVs or you're going to change your construction, the roadways are going to change. And these are all things that are going to come at a cost. And
Yeah.
when you're talking about a scale up of these
Mm.
changes, we need to have systems in place to understand what could be the feedback.
Mm.
About, say, future transportation on climate, because many of the things that we think we are actually trying to solve a problem, it goes back to the issue of unintended. So we are really like at the point where, we are using AI, for instance, or machine learning, and we're looking at the ethics of that. We are not necessarily looking at the ethics of climate mitigation because we have moved with the notion that if we are doing this, it is good for the planet. And I question that notion because anything that you do without understanding is not likely good. So more education, more research, and more choices is where I think we need to be going.
Dr. Niyogi, I'm very curious about what your lab has been telling the city of Austin to do. What are targets here?
We are asking the city of Austin to work with academia because there are more options available than are often presented. And like say what Josh has been talking about, several others have been doing, there are multiple frameworks by which you can approach a problem. And so I firmly believe people are coming with a good intent to solve a problem. The more we see what is available, the more choices can be looked at. And so that's essentially where we are right now, simply creating a conduit by which people talk to each other, whether it is not just the city or UT, but also the community that is involved, and we understand what it is doing, like what we are doing with you.
I went to a presentation recently that was climate oriented, and I asked the mitigation question of the presenter. I think somebody you work with there at the university, Dr. Banner and Jay Banner, and he said, "Hey, you know what we need to do in this city is we need to put trees on the streets around every building that we build. That we need to stop building to the edge of the property." And actually put trees in there so that can be just a natural thing that happens with every building that we do. And I know that with my co-host Barrett living in Medellin, he has said there's trees everywhere and it's cooler there and it's can be a hot place. How was the summer there, Barrett?
Well, Medellin in particular has a very stable climate relatively because it's near the equator and it's at 5,000 feet. So they call it the city of eternal spring. But there were many other places in South America, places that are farther south, more like North America in their normal climate, that would have been in the winter it's winter here, winter in South America when it's summer in North America. And instead their winter in a lot of places had 90 to 100 degree Fahrenheit, if you want to use our Fahrenheit, temperatures. And 100-degree day in winter it never happened before. It was huge transformation. And there's many places that don't have air conditioning or things like that. Medellin, it's very rare for people to have heating or air conditioning because it's usually so stable, but it's much more beautiful. It's much more pleasant, but also there's a lot more resilience built into the city because Austin, compared to most American cities, has done very well with its ordinances to preserve trees and things like that. Part of the construction processes that have been developed, over the past 20 or 25 years when I was originally, supporting people who were helping to start those ordinances, they made a big difference. My friend in Plano goes, oh, people just cut down trees and it's bare and Austin is so nice when I go back to visit. It's on steroids is the wrong metaphor because it's so much more natural. There's so many more trees in Medellin. So they do have a precipitation advantage over Austin, but Medellin is even farther on the type of has been doing the policies for longer, I think, than Austin has been doing. It's kind of amazing. Their social conditions have not been as good, and yet they have succeeded massively and are now getting more buy-in from many foreigners as well as their own gradually rising prosperity. So I hope the technologies we're talking about today, can be applied efficiently with other things like that.
I will quickly add, if that.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, in Austin, the whole notion about how to plant trees, where to plant trees, the fire risk that might be there, etc. This is a very important discussion that is going on. In fact, our other architect for the Climate Collab, Council member Alison Alter, she has been working with us in making us understand the whole interlinkages into the setup. But more trees and the impact we have in terms of the equity around the city with neighborhoods and the heat and other stress. And that's something, in fact, Trevor is studying a lot as part of his policy research. But again, I think we heard it from Jenny that nature-based solutions have their one part, and we need engineering-based solutions as well. And then, of course, there's a policy as a mechanism. So all of this together, we will hopefully come to the world we want. And I don't really know, we know what that world is.
We do know on our clock, we're at about an hour for our show. It might be time to give each person a chance to sum up with their final comments.
I actually had one other question I wanted to bring up, but if folks want to go ahead and wrap up, that's fine too.
Well, go ahead, Selwyn. You got it.
Okay, so I've been following Bill Gates as he's made his transition from consuming to trying to give back. And one of the areas, that he seems to be, he put a lot of energy into was coming up with a way to do nuclear power that's clean, that uses the waste from nuclear plants that have, that exist currently, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious if anyone is paying attention to that. Apparently he's hitting a lot of policy roadblocks and he's trying to start, a scale plant in China and so on and so forth. I'm just curious if anyone's looking into that or has followed any of that, or if any of that's legit or it's.
And let me slap on to that question just another one, which is focusing or exploring yet another potential technology, perhaps, or to what extent is that like a way to, in a way, filibuster or kind of distract from the solutions that we have already? And I think we've touched on this, and the ones that we actually need to invest on that might have more resistance because it has to do with our current energy mix, with the fact that there's big, powerful groups that are mostly benefiting from the oil that we use. And second, the way that we understand food and how we grow it. So how much of this, in a way, is just another shiny object that is just not going to get us there in time?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at that. We have a lot of we do have a lot of technologies, a lot of clean technologies, things like wind and solar, and storage. But I think that they're only going to get us so far. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. Our current storage technologies are really only good for a few hours, whereas, we need firm power for days sometimes, like we saw during Winter Storm Uri. Um, you know, we we are going to need we do need things that can cleanly make electricity that have an on and off switch, to use the Texas parlance, at this point in time. And so I don't necessarily see nuclear or new nuclear as a stalling mechanism or anything. I think it's actually what something like that is what we need to take us from, the depending on where you are, 50 to 65% ish that renewables and storage can kind of get us to. But to take us to that 100% of clean, I think we're going to need some kind of clean, firm technology to get us there. And whether that's nuclear, or that's geothermal, or that's green hydrogen, like whatever it is, we're going to need something. We have the most experience with nuclear. Now we used to build big power plants, but we let all our supply chains atrophy, and we don't do it in this country anymore. And a couple of weeks ago, I would have been more bullish, but now the one in Utah or Idaho is not going through. We'll see how the one in Texas goes through. There's a Dow as contracted with X Energy. I believe that's the right company to build one on the coast. And so we need demonstration projects and technology and to prove that we can do it. But if we want to get truly to 100% and not quadruple the cost of energy, then we're going to need something that is beyond our current technologies.
And storage advancements don't really, like Tesla's trying to get into the big utility size storage. You don't see that as being a future, or maybe it'll be part of it.
Well, it's still just a couple hours with the current lithium ion technologies. I mean, maybe there will be a breakthrough. Maybe there will be something that gets us into the multi-days or the weeks. But
That's not just a scale. That's not just a scale issue. Like, you have to just have more batteries and they last longer. Because
but it's the scales linearly with cost. I mean, it's just like, but it's just
so the
becomes
cost is the
extremely
problem.
expensive to do.
Yeah.
We could, in theory, we could build enough lithium ion batteries, but like,
Right.
I don't even know if we have the minerals to do it, but like, it would also be extremely expensive at this point.
Sure.
Jenny, any
Thanks.
thoughts for us?
I mean, I'm a big fan of Bill Gates. I used to work at Microsoft, and I really like Satya and what he's doing there, and seeing Bill Gates speak live. And so I definitely trust his judgment and some of the solutions that he's putting forth. And we're just not there. So I kind of think it alludes back to, what are things that are tools we can utilize today, and implementing them as soon as we can, while also making sure that we are reducing the amount of harm that we are aware of. It's a very balanced initiative, but I do think that there is a sense of urgency that we should utilize our toolbox. So, and I think he really comes with, speaking of Bill Gates, he really comes with that type of mindset. He's not, dreaming up new from zero ideas. He's really taking the tools that we have. So, and, same with these kind of project drawdown initiatives and things. All of those are scalable initiatives that are possible to implement today. And so I come from hospitality. I like to drop a check, get a smile, and move on. And so I like climate solutions that have the same essence.
And please tip your waitress.
Yes.
Trevor, any final thoughts?
Yeah. I first off, this has been a great show. I've been honored to listen to all these amazing people, but really, there is no like golden goose here. I don't think there's not going to be one solution for everything, and I think that's something that a lot of people kind of in the general public kind of need to start thinking about, and that it's not going to be just one thing kind of rides in and saves us from this issue. And going off of that, not one policy is going to work in every single area. I mean, even the United States, what's going to work in Texas is not going to work in Maine, for example. And so one of the other kind of fallacies that people fall into is this idea that the federal government is going to be able to come up with something that's going to save us. I do not think that that's true. I think it's really going to have to be this grassroots bottom up movement, going from city to city, neighborhood to neighborhood. And that's one of the reasons why, this group is so amazing to see, because you guys are really starting on this sort of, coming together as a neighborhood. And really it is quintessentially American what you guys are doing, coming together as a community to fight for change and fight for something that you believe in. And so that, in my mind, that is the way that we're going to have to go in order to really solve this thing.
Thank you, Trevor. Dr. Niyogi, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think Trevor gets an A in his course. But more seriously, I think I would say that I agree. I think there are, if you look at it as a model we see in the pharmaceutical industry, you have the drug discovery, which is done in academia. You have clinical trials, which need to be done with some partners, and then you need to scale it up by working with the industry. I think to some sense, we are doing the same thing. We have to start developing more ideas in the academia, seed them there, work with city and community to sort of test it out. And then the scale up, to me, is only going to be possible working with the private sector, that they would have the means, they would have the opportunities to work with different governments in terms of making this more globalized. And I think this framework might actually be the way for the future. Now, how do you actually make this more fungible in the manner we have done with, say, IT technology, where you could do some of the offshoring and you could even be in a more across the border world? I think climate solutions is going to need something along those lines. And we are all working to that end. And I'm quite excited about what the future holds at this point.
Yes, especially after listening to y'all talk, I feel a lot better. Dr. Rhodes, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I think, I often have like a 30,000 foot view. It's been helpful to kind of zoom down into the neighborhood level, because I also live in a neighborhood. And so like it's, I think the individual decisions and things like that we make do bubble up to, from the choices we make, to the technologies we buy, the energy that we get, the things that all bubbles up. And yeah, no, I think we can do it. It's just, will we?
We're working on it, Doctor. That's for sure. Thank you all for being with us tonight. This has been a really great program, and I really appreciate your time and all the work you've been doing to figure all these things out. It's very helpful, I know, for our audience to actually see what's going on, to actually put their arms around a bit of this, because it's such a large topic and daunting and hard on people. As a matter of fact, people don't want to talk about it because it's so large and scary. So I think, that's part of what we're doing, is trying to humanize it to a certain degree and bring it to our own backyard and have our own actions be important, as well as what the federal government does. So hopefully, this will actually come together, and further down the road, we'll have another talk about it, so we can see if there's been any actual movement. Dr. Niyogi, I'm looking at you when I say that. So I know with y'all working with the city of Austin, I want to see it happening down the street myself. So with that, thank you, Barrett and Selwyn and Jose for backing us up. And we will be back in a couple of months with another show, probably about nuclear energy. We really need to start looking at that again. And so